Welcome to the Latin MedTech Leaders Podcast, a conversation with leaders who have succeeded or plan to succeed in Latin America. Please subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, etc. Today, our guest is Nicolas Focil, CEO at Fomat Medical Research, a network of research centers based in Oxnard, California. Hey, Nicolas, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Julio. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, Nicolas. I'm so pleased to be here today recording this podcast episode. You and I have been friends for I don't know how many years, and we've been one way or another in contact. And I've been following your steps. You've been following mine. So I've always wanted to have you on camera and to record an interview about your experience, about your plans, and your journey to Latin America. So let's get started with your journey. I mean, how is it that you got to where you are today in Latin America?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. And I've been, I've cherished our relationship. Thank you for this, and it's exciting to have a 30-minute break with you. So the journey. I was born in California, raised in California for the most part, but to parents that are Hispanic, and so I've always known that some of my flows with Hispanic culture, if you will. And as I graduated college, I did research. I did pivotals. I did bench research. I worked under a nominated Nobel laureate. I then worked at a medical device company. Sorry, doing pivotal trials, pre-pivotal trials, and kind of working between the ClinOps department and research and development department. So I had a lot of experience from kind of that angle. And then I got recruited by a site management organization called DRS. And at the time, they were focused on California growth. DRS stood for Diverse Research Solutions. It was more of a diversity in research. And, my father, who's a clinician and researcher, he was part of the board. He was a board member at that company. And he, told them about me, and they recruited me. They brought me on board, and I was part of their team in California. So at the time, we got recruited a company, a special company, and I'm very close friends with them to date. They saw something in us, and they saw that they needed more either recruitment or diversity, or in this case, it had to do with the seasonality of diseases, where in the United States are in seasons, and Latin America are in seasons. So they wanted to put their position in their company in a place where they could recruit in both seasons, if you will. So they asked us, and the company at the board level, half the board, or percent of the board, if you will, was interested in expanding and taking that opportunity to open Latin America, while the other was, let's focus on California. Let's be laser focused. So I saw this as an opportunity, and I kind of going back to my roots and saying, I wanted to explore what it would live like in Latin America. I jumped on the opportunity. So a sister spinoff company called Fomat Medical Research was built to open in Latin America. And so they were two separate companies, but they worked so closely together, almost inseparable. And I sat on both of them. They're both management teams, but I was leadership over here. I was a CEO, kind of managing director, if you will, of Fomat. So as I kind of expanded into South America, and what an experience! What an amazing experience! It was phenomenal. We outgrew DRS. 4 or 5 years later, Fomat actually acquires DRS.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and today, we sit in California. We actually had some growth in Miami at some point, but then we've since just focused on California and in Latin America. Our U.S. business now sits as, of predominantly the largest part of our business. It's more than 90% of our business, I would say. But Latin America is still very much in our roots in everything we do. I mean, we obviously do research and everything in Latin America, but the expansion, the way it kind of flowed, it enabled us. The success in the U.S. has enabled the success in Latin America, and the success in Latin America has enabled us and the success in the U.S. It's very synergistic in so many different ways. And yeah, so now Fomat then went and acquired DRS, and now it's all kind of one big fun company, fun family.
I
Yeah,
like
so that's my
that.
story.
Yeah, it's about having fun. I mean, and
Yeah,
contributing to the world and making a little bit of money here and there. I mean, money is not really the driver. I mean, what you guys do, what we all do. I'm also involved in clinical research. Is fascinating to see the outcomes that you reach with all these innovations on patients, how you can change their lives, at least with medical devices, implantable devices. They're just fascinating. So anyway,
right, right,
I'm
right.
going off topic. The point is that I admire what you do. Thank you for sharing your journey. It's a fascinating one, and I'm so glad that you got reconnected with your roots in
Yeah, no,
Ecuador.
I did, and
Yeah,
throughout the process, I learned a lot.
yeah,
Learned, oh my gosh, you learn
yeah,
so much
sure.
from mistakes, and you learn probably
Yeah.
more from mistakes. So I've had a few of
Oh,
those,
really?
and
Yeah,
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 so
yeah.
yeah, yeah. But luckily, as long as you keep on pushing forward, it's always been a very fun ride.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So, Nicolas, let's talk about trends in Latin America that are relevant to our discussion today. What do you see happening in the region that you see are wins to make it more appealing for clinical research?
Well, I think a big one that's happening right now that's very specific to the recent, to our recent history of kind of world current what's happening right now in the world is the, the wars, Ukraine and Russia. So that is having a direct impact on Latin America, and people's like, wait, what? And so when the U.S. many of the pharmaceuticals see, I mean, we can kind of go into details as to kind of how they strategize, but um, usually that region of the world is in competition with Latin America. When it's a bidding process, and this sucks to say this because obviously you don't ever want to benefit off of something negative, if you will. But given that area of the world right now there's a kind of a question mark. When does the war end? Um, Kind of what does the aftermath look like? Logistics. Bringing kits, taking out kits, monitors, recruitment, your compliance, your retention, et cetera, et cetera. That even from we can go into further detail on kind of like all the implications of that. But so as a strategic perspective, sorry,
No, I was going to say the UMDR too is affecting the environment in Europe. I mean,
right, right,
they're busy research centers. I mean, they can't keep up with all the research that they have to do now.
right.
Yeah,
That too. But when it comes to specifically Latin America, in a competition, when you're like in the war room or strategy
yeah,
room, if you will, in Pfizer, call it med tech, biotech, pharma, kind of your first tier, you got certain like Europe, the North America areas that kind of that sit as like maybe your first tier places you have to be at. But then your second locations and sometimes your third, they're broken down by regions, and regions that we fight against are going to be your Ukraine, your
mm,
Russia.
yeah,
Those are very much where I would say 80, I don't know, I'm throwing this percent out, but more than 50% of studies that Latin America today loses is to that region.
wow.
So,
Eastern
so
Europe in general. Yeah,
yeah, Eastern Europe in general, right? I'm not speaking only Ukraine and Russia. I'm speaking
yeah,
Eastern
yeah,
Europe.
yeah,
But there's a huge question mark. Do these other countries get involved? How what is the aftermath? What about
yeah,
flights?
yeah, yeah.
What about electricity? What about there's a lot of because there's a scare of gas being
Sure.
controlled by
Yeah.
Russia. So
Hmm.
so there's just all of these little uncertainties are now being because clinical research is a very trust driven industry. So if I do a job with you and you do a good job, I'm going to come back to you. And if you do a good job again, I'm going to come back to you again. Why am I going to take a risk on this person over here? I don't know who they are. if I've done this job and I'm having a really good relationship. So we've seen that time and time again where Latin America comes a little short to Eastern Europe, just a little short always, because they already have this track record of this history.
Yeah.
But for
Hmm.
the first time, caused by had to be a war, unfortunately. But you're seeing where there's like this uncertainty over there, and there's a lot of the pipeline is becoming larger and larger for Latin America. So I do expect in the next 24, 36 months to see a large increase in Latin America, which is going to be interesting because at first is everybody's gonna be excited, but then as kind of time progresses, there's going to be saturation of the market. There's going to be so I'm very interested to see where we are 3 years from today.
Very good. Interesting. All right. And I will also add that countries are becoming a lot more mature in Latin America. I mean,
No,
their
without a doubt.
middle class is growing, their economies are stronger, they're joining the OECD, and that's a big deal for Latin America. For the first time in history, we have all these countries: Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Peru is in the ascension path, Brazil is in the ascension path. So the OECD is really, really making an impact in Latin America by increasing the standards that this country have to abide to, best practices for social policies, economic policies, etc. Even clinical research policy. There's a document from the OECD on how to do clinical research, how to regulate clinical research and everything.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, so yeah. Anyway, so
So
yeah, go ahead.
I- I'm sorry, there's a little bit of a connection issue on my end, um, but you're absolutely right. Latin America is, and it's kind of difficult. Many people like try to like sum all Latin America together.
Yeah,
There's certain countries that maybe, and you have the right politics versus the left politics. There are some difference, but if you want to talk it as a whole, you are seeing a kind of an acceleration in these countries and standardization. And the beauty of it is, it's because if you can see what works, right? If you're kind of like from the outside forward, you can see like what's working in these countries, and you can kind of implement them. So you're seeing like what you just mentioned, um, those things like tangibly, objectively make your country better. So right, so now you can make that decision knowing, okay, there's a clear path. If I do this, then this happens, and you're starting to see Latin America. It's hard to say all Latin America because I don't think it's all, but a vast majority of Latin America taking these kind of strides towards improvement, towards standardization, towards
yeah.
quality.
Hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So, Nicolas, let's talk about what you're doing today. I mean, how is your involvement in Latin America now? I understand you had a big involvement in Ecuador. You had some involvement in Colombia and other countries. Please, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a local CRO. So one thing that I think the main success of any project really in Latin America is finding the right partner. And Julio, I think that you're, by the way, amazing. By the way, I've
Thank
told
you.
a lot of people
Appreciate that.
about you, and
Appreciate
for
it.
those who are listening to this podcast, I would definitely recommend them. It's about being able to communicate, and there's a cultural aspect to that, right? There's a cultural nuance there that I think is super important because for Latino like myself, for example, when somebody says, "Hey, I'll be there in 10 minutes. I'll see you in 10," it's that means like, "Hey, I'm on my way. I'll be there in 30 minutes," right? You have time to get a
I haven't
coffee.
even taken a shower yet.
Yeah, exactly. You might still be at home taking a
Yeah,
shower. You haven't even left. But
yeah,
for maybe the U.S. Uh, that I'll see you in 10 minutes
yeah.
means
10 minutes
okay.
is 10
I'll
minutes.
10
Yeah,
minutes is 10 minutes, right? So having that person that has the clinical research expertise but able to speak it in both cultural languages, not only
Yes.
not even like English and Spanish, but cultural languages.
Yeah.
It's it's invaluable, really, because they'll be able to translate. No, he's not going to be here in 10 minutes. The dude's taking a shower, and he'll be here in like 35. Let's go get a coffee,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
it gives you time. And that,
Mhm.
in like from a regulatory perspective, from a
Yeah.
patient recruitment perspective, from from your importation exportation
Yeah.
expectations, it allows you to plan better. It allows you to do project management is huge
Mhm.
when it comes to
Mhm.
like a
Mhm.
global project. And I think that is one thing that these local niche CROs really have that your global CROs might lack, because the way that the system kind of works from a global perspective is you usually hire local, which is great. Don't get me wrong, but then you don't have that liaise that's lived one foot in both countries, right?
Yes. Exactly.
Like you're
Exactly.
calling me right now from Miami. I think you're in Miami, right?
Yes, I am. Today
So
I am. Yeah.
yeah, so you're in Miami. So you kind of you've lived this world and you live that world. So
Yes.
you,
Exactly.
that kind of that dichotomy, or I don't know if that's the right
Mhm.
probably word for this right now, but uh, it it's super important, and that's kind of where I think we excel, because um, in large part we have that kind of symbiotic relationship between Latin America and the United States. Many of our countries, many of our contracts, will sign them in the U.S. so they can sue us here if they need. If we do something wrong down there, they can
Yeah,
sue us
we
here. You
do
know what I mean?
exactly the same. Yeah, in our company.
And
Yeah.
so I think that those little details
Yeah.
are important.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's we have presence in Latin America. We do phase pretty much all phases. Phase one's a little bit less, to be completely
Yeah.
frank.
Yeah.
And in some countries we don't have presence, but we have local partners that we work with,
Okay. Okay.
and so that's a kind of a little bit of different model. It's the same concept though. Again, still having that relationship, still having that know-how locally, but we don't have. It's not our boots on the ground. It's our partners' boots on the ground. And but yeah, so that's kind of our footprint across. And yeah, I mean, from a local CRO, so we do like regulatory IRB, importation, exportation, your monitoring services. But where we also kind of where we started our company, and this is where we specialize, is our site management side of things. So we actually do the recruitment, we actually do the visits in some of our countries. That's the one we don't do it in all countries. That we only do in the ones that we are physically in. But and the other is more of a local CRO. So if you need help in entering to Mexico, if you need help, like that is where our local side enters, local CRO side.
Yeah.
If you need more help recruiting, so with our doctors, with our coordinators,
Yeah.
that's more of an Ecuador thing. You want a vaccine
Okay.
research.
Yeah.
So that's kind of our model in Latin America. And we have people super valuable. I mean, people that are, they like you, Julio, like honest truth.
Thank you.
You can,
Yeah.
you can go into any boardroom and speak your mind, speak with knowledge,
Mhm.
etc. So people like you are super valuable across Latin America, right? So you need to be able to find yours is kind of the expertise is, from my understanding, Colombia and medical
Yes.
devices, and
Yes.
in that space,
Mhm.
maybe there's you're second to probably nobody, right? You know that world
Yeah,
really
there's
well,
really nobody doing this type of work. Agree.
right?
Yeah.
So, but like that, so now you need to be able to find that person for Bolivia, for
Exactly. Yeah.
Argentina. So luckily, I've been lucky, really, and very lucky that you know the world and kind of has allowed me to meet people like you, and to collaborate with people like you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Likewise, I mean, it's an honor to be part of your network and be friends and to somehow work together when we have an opportunity to add
No,
value to a
absolutely.
client. Yeah.
Right.
So, what challenges, Nicolas, have you faced in all these years in Latin America? Let's talk about that a little
Oh, challenges. That, right.
bit. Too many to
That,
count.
yeah, that's a difficult one to like. I want to need like a 5-hour podcast for that one. Uh,
But
so
what would you say is the top three challenges in Latin America? that
I think number
a foreign company will find.
setting realistic expectations.
Okay,
I think
yeah,
that's by far
timelines and all that.
number one. It's
Yeah.
being
Okay,
able to deliver, communicate realistic expectations across all stakeholders, and kind of. So I think that would be number one. That'd probably be the number one problem. Because everybody, you have the person that provides the service that wants more time, and you have the person that's hiring the service that wants it in less time, right? And they
there's a
both
conflict of
speak
interest right there. Yeah,
the conflict of interest. They speak different languages,
yeah.
uh, culturally speaking. Again, I mean, they may speak English together, but culturally speaking, and then the aftermath of like the reconciliation. You'll always the way Hispanics kind of deal with and this is a people person management type of. This is probably my second conflict would be a people problem, which is managing emotions. So if I, as a with my friends from the US, if I get mad at one of them, and when we reconcile, it's totally different in the business world in the US than it is in Latin America. And
Interesting.
so very different. So when you have these meetings that somebody will, like, undoubtedly, timeline isn't met, right? So somebody will, get mad or something,
Yeah.
and over here it's a different way that it's perceived. So you have to. It's a little bit of you're a firefighter slash babysitter, where you're having to massage and kind of, hey, this is what they really mean. Hey, this is what they really mean, and let's continue to be successful in this project together. So
Yeah.
I think that, because if you don't manage that correctly, then you've just now you took some motivation away from one of the sides. So, and that in turn is kind of a spiral effect, because if they're not motivated, they're not going to perform even better. So you want to continue to motivate your team. um, I think it's a difficult ask, but I think that's the number two problem.
Okay.
And the third, which is not the best thing, but it is the truth, is the revolving uh, socioeconomic, political landscape of Latin America. And again, I one of the silver linings of this pandemic is that if you look at depression, if you look at, I'm totally going off a tangent here, but if you look at depression, if you look at depression in the United States versus depression, you know, pandemic induced depression of the United States versus pandemic induced depression in Latin America, you would be shocked that of the difference. The United States has a significantly higher percent, and hundreds of reasons as to why. And I've heard them all, I've read them all, but one of the ones that I think I find to be true, or at least holds a very large percent to why, is Latin Americans through and through are used to change, are constantly used to your dollar changing, your value of your dollar, presidents, ministers, uh,
Inflation.
inflation,
What is it?
all.
Ecuador, Peru that had like 5 presidents in 5 years, something like that.
You have inflation rates, right? Argentina right now, like,
Yeah.
I was there not long ago, so I remember going. What was it? Because I remember this vividly. It was. I remember the story. I don't remember the year, but
Okay.
call it 6 years ago or something. Because I
Yeah.
remember
All
this
right.
specific story. It was one. Maybe it might have been further out. Maybe it was 8. It was actually during Brazil's World Cup. So that's about 8 years ago.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
8 years ago, the the dollar was worth 10 pesos. ¿Cuál es la moneda local de Argentina? Pesos, ¿verdad?
In
What's
in in Argentina, peso. Yes,
or
peso.
pesos? Yes, okay, pesos. Yeah. So it was worth 10 pesos. Today, as of right now, well, as I checked, as of like 2 months ago, I checked, it was like at 100.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Exactly.
you just 8 years, 10 times. Like $1 got you 10 pesos. Today, $1 gets you 100 pesos. Or like
Yeah.
2 years ago, I don't, or when I last checked was, I'd love to check right now to see, but anywho,
100 pesos.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
eight years, right? So you become used to it.
Yeah.
You become immune to so much change. But the
Yeah.
pandemic that created right, this pandemic has created inflation in the United States. Has created, look at the, Trump versus Biden and all of the political changes. You have all these riots, and people are not used to, like, the Great Resignation. You have all of these change that's happened all, like, for centuries in Latin America, right? So you're born into that,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
so I think navigating that for the Hispanic person is super easy. It's super easy to navigate changing of presidents, pandemics, inflation. Like, we're used to it.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's a great
but
point.
I
Yeah.
do think that for somebody that's used to, like, having a constant president for 8 years, having your dollar valued at roughly the same for about 8 years, or inflation
Yeah.
of 2 or 3%,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
it's a little
Yeah.
bit like, whoa, that's a lot of change, but not really. Change is constant. Change is the only constant in Latin America.
Yes, it's constant. The only constant is change. Exactly. Yeah. All right. So, well, Nicolas, we're close to the end of the show, and usually the last question that I ask my guest is about morsels of wisdom. What would be your final words of wisdom? How would you encapsulate your message to somebody who is just starting to look at Latin America as a place to do business in relation to clinical research in this case?
I mean, I would say don't think about it, do it, without a doubt. I I think the most important thing is don't approach Latin America as if you would to approach the U.S. And even within the U.S., like, you don't usually approach one state the same as you do approach another. Financially, you pay differently. Depends on different states. You pay them differently. Um, you know, the way you approach a university is different than you would approach a rural clinic. Yeah, why would that hold any different in Latin America? So, approach these differently and find a local expert. I definitely think you need to have somebody locally that can help you navigate. And that, I mean, it doesn't have to be you, it doesn't have to be me, it could be
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah,
But
especially as you
I do,
correctly said, somebody.
yeah.
No, no. Sorry,
Sorry,
as you
sorry, the
alluded to,
connection.
especially somebody who has, yes, especially somebody who has been in both worlds, who has feet, his or her feet on both worlds. Yeah, can speak both languages, culturally speaking.
Right, right. I think that would be my one recommendation, because quality, you have it. Patience, you definitely have it. Patient naive, you have people that are eager to just continue to do more research. Cost is, it's
Oh
more
yeah,
affordable. You have very talented people. Actually, just the other day is like, I see the other day, like it was yesterday. This is like eight months ago. Um, I, I was going through an audit, and I brought some of my team from South America to the audit in North America, and the agency, when they left, they were they complimented us on
wow,
the expertise of our South American team as well.
wow,
It goes to show that there's so much talent at a elite level, all throughout Latin America. So, I definitely, the quality is not something I would be concerned about. Recruitment is not something I would be concerned about. Again, I think I've harped on it a lot this call, but I think communication is where I think it is the most important piece.
and expectations, time expectations. I mean, the meaning of mañana is so different. Mañana in Latin America can mean in a week or in a month. I mean, it's later. It's not tomorrow. The
Yeah,
day after today. No, it's someday
yeah,
in the future, in the near or
right,
middle future.
right. It's also like the tone that like, oh, yeah, sí, mañana,
Exactly, and the
mañana.
tone, and the
Uh,
tone. Yes,
right.
that's key too.
And another thing is the holidays. That's another one.
The
Like
holidays, yeah.
I just find that there's so much more holidays in Latin America than there are.
Oh,
Like,
I mean,
and
yeah,
there's
that's a religious uh, issue or
yeah,
something that we inherited from the Spanish culture, and every 2 or 3 weeks there's a religious holiday.
but
Saint
you have to
Nicholas,
embrace
Saint
it.
Julio.
Yeah,
Huh?
yeah.
You have to
Well, all
embrace
you
it.
have to do
Yeah,
embrace it. Like
yeah.
lean into it.
Yes,
Realize
sir.
that that is what you're not going to change this system. This system is not
Exactly.
changing.
Exactly.
So lean into it, realistic expectations, and I promise you it'll be successful. That's
Yeah.
my takeaway, I suppose.
Beautiful. Beautiful, Nicolas. Thank you so much for being in the show. I really enjoy our conversation as always, and I look forward to being in touch.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.